everyone. Thank you a lot for joining our webinar. Very excited to see all of you here. So we really want to keep this webinar interactive. So if you have any questions to us, feel free to drop them in the chat. And just feel it is. We're happy to answer any of them. And I'm here with Dustin Lehr as our guest for this webinar. So hi, Dustin. We're super happy to have you today with us, and that you're going to share the knowledge with the audience. So. It would be great, if you can briefly introduce yourself and your journey into the security and into security champions program. Like, how did you actually get started, and get to be passionate about this topic of the relationship with developers and actually get them on board with the security?
Oh, 100%. There's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? Yeah. So thank you for having me, Alexandra. I really was looking forward to this because you always ask such great questions. So it might get a little spicy, and you're probably going to put me in the hot seat, but I'm actually really looking forward to that. So yeah, I'm Dustin Lehr. I was a developer for a long time. So I wrote a lot of code. I was developing applications in a variety of industries for about 13 years before I got into security. So I've seen a lot of things. I've been part of a lot of really cool projects. I was in the DoD for a bit. I worked in retail. I worked on video games actually for a little bit at Sony, which was an interesting experience. And then, yeah, I got into cybersecurity. I always had a focus on quality in general as a developer. So it was much more than just writing code for me. It was, are we doing this efficiently? Or, do we have all the right processes in place that are helping to enable developers and so forth? Are we building secure software? Is it maintainable? Is it performant? Right? All of that sort of stuff was always on my mind. So it was a very easy switch to get into cybersecurity. And I was a security engineer for a few months, and I got an opportunity to lead the AppSec team. This was back at Staples, where I basically rolled out, scaled the program at Staples. And then most recently, I was at Fivetran, where I basically did the same thing. So I've got a lot of, I guess, battle scars when it comes to rolling out programs, setting strategy when it comes to AppSec, and like we're going to talk about today, building relationships with developers and development leaders. So happy to, just excited to be here. Happy to get into the meat of the topic.
Yeah, perfect. So let's start, with the first topic that we wanted to discuss today. So how to earn developers, respect, since you were the one before. So what if you start from the beginning, as so what should people understand, what are actually key needs and the concerns of the developer when it comes to the security and in general?
Yeah, I really like how you pose that, because you do have to earn developers respect. This is a thing. I think through my years of sort of analyzing the way that developers think in general, and having been one myself, there's a bit of a club that you have to get into, more or less, right? And you do have to earn respect. It's not just given to you. You can't just sort of show up as a noob and expect everyone to say, "Hey, welcome to the community." It's more like, what are you doing here? What do you do? How do you contribute? Are you at the level that we are? So there's always this sort of social hierarchy, if you will, when it comes to technical people in general, and especially developers. And I think the way to start earning respect, which, I'm sure we're going to dive into this more, but this is probably a good initial thought, is to try it. Okay. And I've talked a lot about this with a lot of friends. I think people very quickly say, I'm not technical. Like, I'm not technical. I don't understand that. I don't understand what you're talking about. And it's, in my view, it's a very simple thing to just get yourself more involved in the technical world and in the development world specifically by trying stuff like, go learn Python, go learn some initial language and just play around with it and start to understand what are the nuances here? What's this world like? What are the frustrations involved? More on that later. What is it like to be building something ultimately? And I think you'll find, especially as people who, are sort of previously not comfortable with that stuff, that when you start trying, when you start to, be part of that world and start building things and so forth, they'll start to let you in pretty quickly because it's like, hey, this person is trying, this person is putting themselves out there, they're trying to learn and so forth. So I really think that's the first step. I do think a lot of security teams can and should make more of an effort just to learn the world, in general. And I think this goes for life in general as well. Like if you want to build a closer relationship with anyone, try liking what they like. Try getting into what they like. Try understanding the things that they like and why they like them. This is musicians. This is, I don't know, your teenage kid, you want to build a stronger relationship with your teenage kid. Learn about their world. What are they thinking about? What are they concerned about? What worries do they have and so forth? So that's where I would start.
Okay. And once you actually, learned how, like, what passionates with them, like, what could be steps, that you can develop for effectively, communicating with them, like to speak, their language. Because let's say you learn, but maybe you don't always understand how to apply that learning. Now, how would you apply that?
Yeah, 100%. I do think that being a developer, you have a bit of a different mindset. You look at the world in terms of solutions and code a little bit more. And I think when you start getting into it, you start to go down that path to the point that you can connect with people on that common ground and then work with them. Like, again, I do think building an effective relationship has a lot to do with just listening to other people and putting yourself out there, maybe not coming in hot, coming in a little bit more humble and saying, I'm just trying to learn this. Can anybody help me? And you're going to find a broad spectrum of developers too. You're going to find people that are really willing to jump in and help you. You're going to find people that you're not ready for yet because they're like, I don't want to waste my time with that, helping other people learn. I've got my own thing. And those may not be the people that you can connect with quite yet, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it takes, time to actually, find this common language and find, the right way to approach that. And if you're entirely, new to organization, and let's say you might have like a lot of security engineers, especially application security engineers, have that development background, so they can understand from a little bit how the software developer thinks, but it might vary from one organization to another, I guess. So when you start in a new organization, if you would have to, have like a checklist of things that you need to do, what, would it be?
Yeah, and this would be from a security team's perspective. What would this checklist be? Yeah. Yeah, I do think there's a lot to do on the security team in terms of shifting developer mindset, having people think a little bit more when it comes to security best practices. I don't think you start there. I don't think you can roll into a company and just say, here's all the new standards and guidelines, and we're just going to completely flip your life upside down. And now there's a whole bunch of new things that you have to do. I think the best place to start from a checklist standpoint is listening, like we said, right? Learning their perspective, learning their systems, having them essentially lead you around, right? Hey, help me learn. Like, what are you guys building here? How does it work? Right? That sort of stuff. and then starting to collect their feedback in terms of, okay, like what things are working, what things are not working, what are your concerns? And the thing is, when they see your title as a security person, they're going to position their responses appropriate for you. So they're going to start to share their thoughts about the security of the product and opportunities there. And maybe we do this, but maybe we shouldn't do that. You know, maybe we should do something different. And they start to sort of offer that just with you being there and just with you listening. So you don't have to come in hot and start sharing, hey, why don't you do this? And here's the new way. I think that they will, I mean, they're smart, right? I think that they will start to offer that stuff. And those are the opportunities that you can really dig into. Okay, now that I understand your perspective, how do I design an effective program that's going to be catered to or tailored to the needs of the developers, while also bringing in the best practices that you know too, right? So there's a bit of a balance, but certainly including them in the conversation is the way to go in this case. I've got a saying, I think, for people to take away, and that if you know, and that's that weigh in leads to buy-in. So just the simple act of allowing people to weigh in will actually have them be more likely to buy into the ultimate program that you're trying to create.
Okay, interesting. And speaking, about like introducing new program and new initiatives, that's something that you've been you are an expert, on it, and the topic, of gamification. So the next topic of the webinar I wanted to talk about. So, once you develop this program, how do you introduce, or how can gamification can be effectively used to engage developers, in security practices?
Yeah, certainly. So I do think it goes back to a lot of the analysis that I mentioned that I've done, and that's what ultimately motivates engineers. And I do want to step back and talk about the term gamification, because I do think it's a bit of a misnomer, more or less. Gamification is not necessarily turning things into games so much as taking the things that work, the techniques that work in games, and applying them to, frankly, non-game situations. So it's all about learning what motivates people and then trying to implement certain techniques to motivate them at the end of the day. Now, in terms of reaching developers and so forth, one of the, I think, important things that comes out when we think about developers is, we mentioned the social ladder before, right? I also think there's a heavy motivation when it comes to development and accomplishment, meaning that developers like to see the results, right? They like to code something. They like to see, hey, did this work? Did this not work? Am I being productive? So that feeling of accomplishment is also a big one. And then they've got a lot of sort of higher meaning and purpose involved in their work. There's a lot of do the right thing when it comes to building software. That's important as well. And I think taking all of those motivators into account and designing gamified experiences that appeal to those is a really good thing. Now, I've set a bit of a foundation. Let me give a few examples. So an example would be, like, you've seen probably the security champion like belt system. More on security champions in a minute, but that's basically a status that people can earn, right? So the more that they can contribute, maybe you're trying to reinforce or encourage people to fix security vulnerabilities and so forth. But what are they getting out of that? Is it actually increasing their status? Is there some sort of a sort of public recognition thing, going back to the social motivators, that you can do that really highlights the developers that are doing really well here? I think there's a lot of carrot in especially in traditional cybersecurity. There's a lot of stick when it comes to, like, smacking people around and making them do stuff. But I do think it's more effective to focus on the carrot, right? What are the rewards? What are the things that people can aim toward And I do think increasing in status publicly is something developers absolutely latch onto. And that's why I think you see those belt level systems for security champions work really well.
Yeah, and can you share, some personal examples, where this gamification actually worked very well?
Yeah, boy, I've got a few examples. I think one interesting place when I started getting into this and learning about it all more, there was an opportunity for my team to get their timesheets in on time. Let's talk about this a little bit because this was interesting. So I started learning about gamification and human motivation, all this stuff. I learned about this concept about what's called a group quest.
Okay.
And it's basically, how do you get everybody on board working together to accomplish something? And the problem that we were trying to solve is that I was kind of tired of nagging everybody about their timesheets. Like, you got to get your timesheets on time every Friday. Why do I have to run around and chase everybody? Hey, you didn't get your timesheet in. Can you get your timesheet in? Like, a little bit annoying from my perspective. So I'm like, okay, how do we maybe implement some sort of technique here to make it more attractive? Okay, so this is what I did. This is great. So what I did is I simply posed a challenge. Can we get our timesheets in on time this week, next week, and the week after, 3 weeks in a row? If you do this, you get some sort of reward. Okay.
Yeah.
So we had, and the reward I won't go into, but it was something that was attractive to them right at the end of the day. So what was interesting is that they latched right onto that, right? They're like, okay. And the thing is, if any one of them failed, everyone fails, right?
Oh,
so the entire
okay.
team has to get their timesheet in.
Yeah.
So there's this social pressure that came with that, where I actually had people on the team reminding each other, hey guys, don't forget, if we want to hit our 3 in a row, you got to get your timesheet in. Okay.
Yeah.
Then what happened? So they hit that target. And then I was like, okay, how far can we take this? Can we do 4 in a row? Right? So they did 3 in a row. Can we do 4 in a row?
Yeah.
And now they've got a streak. Okay. So now if any one of them fails to get their timesheet in on time, they lose the entire streak. They got to go start back over. Okay. So long story short, I remember the number, we got up to 19 weeks in a row that everybody got their timesheet in on time. Right.
Okay. From 3 to 19.
Yeah. So I share this. It's not necessarily developer specific, but I share this because this is a very simple form of gamification. It uses, like I mentioned, group quests. It uses a streak type concept and so forth. And it was really effective. So from there, I took that to the next level and started to apply these concepts to security champion programs. And obviously, security champions are typically associated with AppSec. So there's a lot of developers involved. And I had designed at a few times now for other clients as well as for my internal team programs. These kind of progression levels, like the level systems, right? And you basically had to earn a certain number of points before you got up to certain levels. And the way that those points were earned were by taking action. Okay. So not just I did some training, but actually fixing a vulnerability or actually taking an extra training, like an optional training, or sharing what you learned with someone else, or inviting someone to be a champion. Like, we listed out all of the different actions that we want folks to take. And then that reward system where they could sort of progress just totally took off. And I think a big part of that is because they got a lot of recognition for it. Right. So yeah, so I've done a lot of those programs at this point, and they work really well.
Okay, there is a question in the chat from Francesco, just interesting. Why none solved the issue automating the timesheet submission?
Oh boy, that's a good question. We might have a developer on our hands here too, because that's, so I was talking before about the engineering mindset, right? And hey, we've got a problem. Why don't we write some code, to go fix it? That's a really good question. I do think that there was a manual need there, but automating it, that would have been a good idea as well. It's a really good question. Maybe like some sort of clock in, clock out that people can do, or maybe even just track folks' time on the laptop. I think some of the challenge there, to be honest, is that we had different projects that you had to allocate time to as well. So it'd be very difficult to figure out exactly how you're spending your time in an automated fashion. We sort of needed people's manual, unfortunately, input there for it to be accurate. And yeah, I've done that on the government contract side too, and it's very rigorous in terms of where your time is going. So yeah, I'd be curious to know what kind of automated solutions are out there now. This was a while ago, but it's a good question.
Yeah, I think
engineer, he says.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think sometimes in some companies, like when I worked in aerospace, some people, like half of the people in my department, they had to badge in and badge out. Like it was compulsory for them to do it kind of manually for the timesheets on their side. So it might be depending on the organization structure. It's something that's happens or required in some very old school organizations. That was in my case. So yeah, let's go on the topic now. You already mentioned the security champion program. So that's something I've been passionate about, and have a lot of experience there. So don't worry, now we'll get there on like how measure the success. So I think the first question is maybe like with the previous case, it's good to set the foundation, like I've done with gamification. So what actually are the essential elements of the successful security champion program?
Yeah, I think stepping back and sort of defining security champions and then what makes them successful. So I think that security champion programs at this point are a very effective way to start a cultural movement. And I think this is true for champions in any case, but let's talk about developer culture. I think that there's this concept of diffusion of innovation, which I talk about a lot, but it's basically a normal curve of the population. And you've got some people who are essentially early adopters. You've got some people who are laggards or late adopters. And then you have sort of everyone in between. And people are basically going to react to change differently, right? You're going to have people that resist it completely. You're going to have people that are like, well, we're doing everything fine, like, leave me alone. You're going to have the majority who are like, I don't know. And then you're going to have some people, a subset of people who they latch right onto it because it's been something they've been talking about, or I've been trying to get people to listen that we need to be more secure, or whatever that is. And finding those people, those are your initial allies. Those are essentially your security champions at the end of the day. Okay, so finding the allies, finding the champions for the cause, in this case, secure coding, let's say, is a necessary part of more wide adoption, essentially. So the idea is you would work more closely with security champions and help build their skills. And they've already got some interests that they have expressed. So how do you work more closely with them so that they become over time basically advocates or even representatives of security on their own teams and in their own departments? Okay. And this is an effective way to essentially scale the security program.
Yeah.
Because now you have advocates, right, that are across the company on your side, more or less. And what that does is over time, so this is it's a fact that people are way more likely to listen to their peers than to listen to you as a security person, unfortunately. So you can be screaming at the top of your lungs, why doesn't everyone write secure code or whatever it is? And it's not until their peer says, hey, maybe we could do this a little bit differently on our team, that's when people are going to start listening, right? So winning those advocates and then making sure that they're empowered to express the changes that are needed across the company. That's the whole concept of security champions at the end of the day. Now, where that combines with gamification, I think that's where the key is to building a successful champion program. Because I do think that you need to take into account the motivators, like we were talking about before, of your champions. And you need to design a program that is tailored to their needs and their wants so that they get excited about it, so that they earn the status that they care about, right? So that it can be about what's in it for them and, you know, building their career and helping them learn and that sort of stuff. So I think that's the key to a successful champion program. Now, there was a question. I don't know if you want to go straight into the question, but there's a question about measuring this.
We can go.
Yeah. Let's talk about this more because this is absolutely critical. You know, it's one thing to, like I was saying, go find your allies across the company. It's something else to justify the existence of your champion program and even go as far as to get budget for your champion program without building a strong case for it. And this is where metrics comes in 100%, right? So how do you measure this beyond just attendance? I do think that attendance is a decent place to start because it shows interest. However, I do think you need to connect, like I was saying before, the actions that your champions are taking to actual security results ultimately. And this is hard. Okay, so let me just say this, that in a lot of cases, there's no direct causation that you can prove behind things like training or behind things like you know, attending and learning things to maybe introducing less vulnerabilities in your environment. Like, how do you draw that direct connection? It's the same issue with training, frankly. You know, how do I prove my value of my secure code training product? Right? Well, you can never say that, hey, someone was about to code a vulnerability and then they remembered their training and they didn't do it. Like, how could you ever prove that? So what I typically recommend is to not think about causation as much as correlation and trying to do things like A/B testing and so forth to show, hey, teams that have security champions, how do they compare to teams that don't, right? In terms of vulnerabilities introduced and in terms of even like phishing emails identified and that sort of stuff. And then even comparing security champions themselves to non-security champions as well. And you can really do that by splitting the population, like I was mentioning, A/B testing. You can also do snapshots of like before and after. Like before the security, if you're able to sort of isolate it in this way, right? Before the security champion program, we struggled with these things. We introduced the champion program and we're measuring those things still. And we can show that, hey, there has been an improvement. And that really, when it comes to senior leaders paying attention to this stuff, it really makes a strong case for your champion program.
Okay. And how big should the organization be, you know, to start running A/B testing? Is like just because some, to be conclusive, you might need, you know, at least some amount, you know, for people, or just, you know, 2 different teams you think is enough to actually be, you know, statistically valid?
Yeah, statistically significant. I do think that you need a larger population if you're gonna prove this. I don't think you could prove it with like, you know, one team has a champion, one team doesn't, and comparing their results. I don't think there's enough. There's actually a lot of documentation if you get into sort of the statistics world in terms of what is the correct size of a population and even sample size of the population taken randomly. By the way, random is key to prove this case. So yeah, it's a good question. I would say larger orgs. And I also think that larger orgs in general need to utilize champions more often than smaller orgs because there's more people and typically the size of the security team doesn't necessarily scale in the same ratio as it's in a smaller company, right? You might have a single AppSec engineer for 50 developers at first. That's a 50 to 1 ratio. But at a larger company, when you've got thousands of developers, there are some companies I will say, and that I've seen, that have a pretty good ratio, but I do think that ratio gets worse and worse the larger the company, which just means that you're going to need to, come up with different ways to scale your message. And that's where champions come in.
And what kind of metrics would you put, on dashboard? Let's say you're comparing the two groups. What kind of, dashboard would you build to, prove, let's say, to the leadership that it works?
Yeah, there's a lot of options there. So one of my favorite things that I've built out is we basically had a single score that we associated to each different development team. And it was a gamified type experience because we actually had like Olympic medals for each of the different teams that showed, hey, you're gold, you're silver, and so forth. And what was interesting is that we could then, so those single scores were basically a combination of a handful of different metrics. Things like MTTR, mean time to remediation, how quickly are people fixing issues? What's the vulnerability escape rate is a good one to look at, like in the phases of your SDLC. Where are you finding vulnerabilities? Are they getting all the way to production? Are they stopped earlier in the cycle? Where are they stopped, and so forth? You can measure that as something that's effective. Just introduce vulnerabilities introduced, which you could do per lines of code written, that sort of stuff. So those are probably 3 good ones to start with. A lot of them are centered around vulnerabilities. And I think risks as well. So when you get into more of the preventative things like threat modeling and so forth, I think it's good to measure risk introduced in your architectural designs. And yeah, there's a lot of things to measure. I think one other thing I would say here is you can sort of hesitate because of all of the possibilities. And I think it's good to just, pick 1 or 2 and focus on those, like try to figure out what are the things that are most important to you right now and just start start somewhere, essentially.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is actually, to get started. Also, I think was a question from Francesco as well in the chat. The biggest challenge in security, most notably in AppSec, is finding the best way to be impactful, even if you have business decisions that sometimes press developers into skipping security part. So how do you handle this?
Oh yeah, this is a can of worms. Yeah, so that, and I was hoping we would get into this because I do think that developers are time constrained, right? There's only so much that they can do with their time. And a lot of it has to be focused around feature development, ultimately. I would say, so I've got a lot of thoughts here, but I would definitely say feature development is important. Okay, so I would never say that you should sacrifice, the business for security. Like you have to keep the business going. Whatever the business needs is extremely important. And, I think part of the conversation should definitely shift into understanding your unique business and what is necessary from a security standpoint. You're not going to have perfect security. So what are the features and so forth that make your product more attractive to customers? What are customers asking for, and so forth, and trying to work with your product teams to prioritize those things. Now, in addition to that, and this is a very important thing that I would love to see more attention on in general. I do think that engineers and engineering leaders have a responsibility to speak up and influence product and the rest of their company to understand what is necessary to build a good quality product at the end of the day. Okay, so you're not going to get every single security requirement passed down from your product people. Okay,
Yeah.
you need to speak up. You need to say, hey, it sounds like you're trying to do this. Maybe even bring in the security engineers as developers and say, is this okay? Is this something we should be doing? And then provide that feedback back to the product folks. I think that's our responsibility at the end of the day as engineers, to help people understand how to build good software at the end of the day. And then from there, you can kind of have that business decision, but at least it would be a conscious decision, and everybody goes into it with their eyes open. Like, hey, we know this is a security risk. We're deciding to take that risk, as opposed to just not even knowing about it. So yeah, step up, and this is very important, I think, for engineers in general to be encouraged to have a voice at the end of the day.
Yeah, it is hard to find your own voice, especially, yeah, it depends on the personality as well, for sure, and the level of experience, and it's not always easy to speak out, especially in a large organizational setting. And if we're going, back to the security champions, so we talked about like how do you measure, the success of the champions program, but with the dashboards and everything. But on the other side, I think what's important to talk about is how do you actually measure, day-to-day security champions, experience and behavior, and that's something you've been working on a lot with the Katilyst. So I don't know if you can share more about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, because so I've been working on this for a few years now, Katilyst, and what we're trying to do is address a specific problem, and that's to reinforce developers taking action when it comes to security. And I think one of the biggest challenges here is that there's a lot of tools out there that are spitting findings everywhere. There's a big pile of we've got plenty of vulnerabilities. Like we're good on that.
Yeah.
The real challenge is more on the remediation side. How do we actually motivate people to take action to not only just fix the vulnerabilities, but also to think of ways to prevent those vulnerabilities. So what I've been trying to help folks do is really design an effective program that puts developers and security champions in the center of that conversation, and find ways to use the carrot, like we were talking about, find ways to actually motivate them to take action at the end of the day, which is it's a mindset shift, frankly, because I do think that traditional security folks use more of the stick, and they say, oh, you better fix your stuff or you're going to be in trouble. Or even to the point of, and this bothers me to no end, even punishing people who report that they've, caused some sort of a security incident. Maybe they posted a password or something on GitHub on accident. And I do still think there's too much sort of shaming involved there, in terms of, let's make an example out of this person. They messed up. We got to send a message to everyone else. But that just creates this culture of fear at the end of the day. And what I'd like to see is more positive reinforcement. Hey, thank you for reporting this. You're now much wiser, having gone through that. You can help us educate other people, for the reasons, why you shouldn't do this, but also how to maybe even put technical or automation controls, Francesco, in place in order to prevent these things going forward. And that's the kind of culture that we're really trying to drive. How do we reward people? How do we take sort of that positive reinforcement approach? Oh, Francesco, you mentioned running hackathons. I do think that hackathons are extremely effective, and I think it's because people are interacting, right? There's a challenge posed to them. Can you find this thing? Can you use your technical skills, to hack this fake website or whatever that is? So yeah, I've found a lot of luck with CTFs. There's a lot of good CTF products out there in general. So, there was a question posed before by Alexandra around Katilyst. And I think one of the biggest challenges when it comes to gamification in general is how do you track these things? Like we were talking about hierarchies, status that you could earn by leveling up and so forth. I do think some people track that stuff over like using spreadsheets and so forth. And what we're trying to do is build more of an automated system, an automated product that helps track those things and track actions and so forth. So
yes, so we've been talking together about the actionable remediation, and I think the question that the actual reinforcement behavior, positive reinforcement behavior, is that helps as well with the remediation. And I'm also curious. I'm also curious if have you seen that the actionable remediation advice when it comes to the relationship with developers, basically providing them, especially with your software development background, providing them some maybe code snippets from the tools or things like that, does it actually help as well to improve the relationship and just get them more on board and find the common language in a sense?
yeah, I think that's important, and that goes back to the collaboration, right? So how do you work with the developers to define essentially best practices, right? And post guidance. Maybe people have solved similar problems before. Well, what did they come up with? And I think a lot of these security champion sort of community events and so forth are centered around knowledge sharing. Hey, you were you had an issue, security issue. Can you share what you did, right, to overcome that so that other people can learn from it? And then obviously, to your point, documenting that I think is good because it creates this repository of artifacts, for people to take going forward. So
yeah, I think it's kind of the same with the writing, the rules and things like that, that there are a lot of GitHub repositories there. But yeah, the community aspect, it's something that I want to talk about as well. Like, how do you, for example, persuade potentially, say you have a developer who's interested about security, how do you persuade them to join the community, or what communities would you recommend? Because you have one as well.
Oh yeah, thank you for the softball there. I think that there are a handful of communities out there. There's a good, OWASP, I think, comes to mind in terms of learning more about application security and developer security and software security. I did start a meetup called Let's Talk Software Security as well. It's all about software security. It's an open discussion, so it's a little bit of a different format. Totally free, by the way. There's nothing that I'm selling here. It's just a way to bring people together that have similar interests. And we chat, and it gets interesting. It's a 2-hour monthly meeting on a different topic each month. And we sometimes disagree, there's little things where we're kind of getting into the details, and since it's an open discussion, we just never know where it's going to go. So it's a heck of a lot of fun. So yeah, there's plenty of ways to get involved.
Yeah. And how can you, for example, motivate them sometimes maybe to give maybe do you think it would actually help to motivate them to give presentations on how they build something securely, or at least they show off in front of their peers kind of as well? Yeah. So
yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of sort of the social proof aspect, where if you and frankly it kind of leans into more of that creative side as well. Like it helps to highlight a unique or creative solution that somebody came up with, which makes them feel good about it. It makes them feel more involved in the program in general. And then obviously other people see that, again, going back to the social side, and they say, hey, that's cool. How can I be maybe, be more creative and come up with different solutions so that I can get on the spotlight sometimes. Now, doesn't always work for everyone. Let me say this, that not everyone wants to be in the spotlight. So there could be different ways to motivate certain individuals. And I think giving people those options is really important too. Like, how do you want to contribute to the security of the company? Is it by presenting in front of other people your solutions? Is it more in the background with documentation and guidance and building maybe shared or common modules for other people to use? You can do that all without being in the public eye. So it's all about kind of giving people those options.
Yeah, I see. So we have I wanted to keep like the last 10 minutes of the webinar for the questions, so everyone don't hesitate to ask them. But before we dive into the questions, like, what do you think from our whole conversation today? What could be, the key really takeaways that people should remember?
Yeah, so like we covered earlier, I do think listening to developers is key. I think that if you roll in and start to dictate and start to set rules and so forth without taking the time to understand where your developers are coming from and so forth is not a good idea. So I think listening is definitely a theme. I think finding allies, finding those security champions is also very important. There's going to be some developers that resist your effort all along the way until it catches on to the culture as a whole. There are going to be some developers that will latch right onto it. They'll get excited about what you're trying to do. And those are the ones that you want to work with. So I think that's a good takeaway as well.
Okay, great. So let's take the question of Domas. What to do if the gamification system doesn't work and the developers see it as a waste of time because they're overloaded with a large amount of work?
Oh boy, there's a lot to dig in here. I will say that this happens. I think that doing the analysis up front to try to figure out what's most likely to motivate the developers is a really good way to prevent this from happening. I also think that you need to recognize developers are busy and that the gamification system has to be something supported by leadership that has the champions or the developers in the center, and that has to be supported all the way to the top. How do we reward and recognize people for doing the right thing has to be part of the culture, more or less. If it's not, you're going to just run into problems all along the way. And in terms of your specific question, what do you do if it's not working? I do think you go back to the drawing board. I think you get people's input. You try to understand, well, what's working here, what's not, and so forth. And then, give it another try. I do think putting developers at the center is going to make a big difference. In terms of time, it's a challenging question because in some cases, developers may not have a lot of time. And how do you justify that time? I do think that you got to make that case at the leadership level. The engineering leaders and so forth, they have to be bought in to the value of taking security seriously. And if they don't, you have a big challenge on your hands. You're going to have to start kind of working through that problem at a grassroots level. So I've done this. I've had senior leaders not buying it, right? They're like, why are we doing this? Like, this is a waste of time. And what I've had to do is just work from the ground up, one case at a time. Like, hey, we're teaching we've been able to convince an engineering leader to let us spend a little time with their engineers. And the results were this. Okay, here's some feedback. Here are the results at the end of the day. That's one team, right? Now, can you share that with a couple other engineering leaders and just kind of work this problem slowly? Hey, can we do this with maybe your engineers? Because feedback over here was very positive. What do you think? And now you've got 2 development teams out of 100 on board, right? Hey, there's something happening over here. There's 2 teams that really believe in this. And you just have to like build this case. It's very painful. Like, don't get me wrong when this happens. But eventually the senior leaders will listen, because you've got enough data, you've got enough allies who you've been able to convince that this is the right way.
How much time should you allocate, to prove that it works or it doesn't?
As much as it takes. I mean, look, here's the thing. In cybersecurity, we are in the business of change. Okay. We are in the business of changing our cultures to be more secure, because if they were already secure, what would they need us for? Okay. So when you walk in the door, when you're thinking about security, you have to come at it from a change management angle. How do we make changes? And these changes, if you're trying to change an org for any reason, it takes a long time. But you haven't fully succeeded, I think, until you've actually induced that change across the company. So as much time as it takes, and I will say this, that if there's just absolute resistance to what you're doing in general, why are you there? Why did you, why did they hire you? Right.
Yeah.
So to some extent, like, the fact that you have the position you have does show that somebody somewhere cares about security, or you wouldn't be there. And that's a place to start. Why did you hire me? What are the changes you want to see, and so forth? And you can really sort of take that, again, case by case, to build up a grassroots approach to eventually get senior leader support. It takes a long time, but don't give up either. I'm not telling you to quit if it's hard. I am saying, though, that it takes a long time, and it's going to take a lot of thick skin to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I think you need to probably define that. Yeah, that timeline each personally, when is enough is enough, I guess. And when is the culture actually is ready to at least you see some improvements in the culture, versus when you don't see anything and then you just have to give up. So is there any other questions from the audience? I think if not, I think I can conclude the session, so I can wait a minute or to see if there are any other questions. So don't be shy, and we're here to answer you, and don't be afraid to ask challenging questions as well.
More challenging questions.
More challenging questions.
Yeah.
Francesco, like Francesco.
All of them.
All of them.
These have been great questions.
Yeah. So I guess not. So thank you everyone so much for joining. I think I've learned. I hope you've learned a lot. We'll also publish the recording on YouTube channel, and we'll send it to you. So if you need to rewatch any parts or show it to someone that you know, don't hesitate to rewatch it and share the link as well. So thank you so much for joining and attending the webinar. Thank you so much, Dustin, for coming here and sharing your experience with everyone.
Of course. Thank you very much for having me. To everyone, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to chat about this stuff.